kombucha, super. So
Okay, yeah, sure. So kombucha, kombucha's not exactly raw. I have, really, kombucha is very safe. I mean, there are some rumors circulating, of people getting sick from kombucha, and it's really all based on these sort of two cases in the mid '90s in the United States where, this woman died and they couldn't figure out why, and she was making kombucha, so they
Really?
decided it must be and then they couldn't find, so they issued like the U.S. Centers for Disease Control issued a warning about kombucha, but then in their subsequent analysis, they found nothing toxic, no known toxins or dangerous bacteria in the kombucha. They found dozens of other people making kombucha with the same mother without any problem, and they basically decided it was something else that killed her. It wasn't that. But meanwhile, the rumor that it could be dangerous persists. Then there's also the this American mycologist Paul Stamets wrote an essay that was a little bit critical of kombucha based on sort of, let's say, theoretical concerns about the molds that could grow on the surface. So, I would say that it's always important to add a little bit of mature kombucha so you have an acidic environment, and that's the biggest thing that will prevent the surface from developing mold. I have many times just removed the mold that grew on the kombucha and drunk it without any problems. But, if people get blue molds on their kombucha, I would say they should just throw away the kombucha and start fresh, just, based on theoretical considerations and not really on people getting sick.
There's something very challenging for the whole system in this in fermenting, because it goes against rules in every country. And there, I think in Brazil you cannot you cannot commercialize some traditional honey that it's fermented because it's against the law, and then you have a lot of things going against the basis of the food systems that are really pro-pasteurization. So there's an opportunity and there's a big challenge there on growing all this method worldwide of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. And most people who I meet who start small fermentation businesses, they go through a process with the, whatever government agency they have to, get their approvals from. Sometimes the story is that people, have an inspector who is familiar with this food, and is very supportive. But more often I hear the story that, people can't believe this could possibly be safe. It sits out at room temperature for 2 months. How could that be safe? And so they basically have to collect information, find technical papers, and basically educate the inspectors who are regulating them.
And a lot of the scientists, scientists that work on those agencies as well, because you have scientists like food scientists that work on dead food. I mean that they argue that industrial food is very safe because it's almost dead. You cannot grow anything from it.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I see this contradiction. I mean, I get this. Nobody ever died from drinking a Coca-Cola, but how many people have ever died from drinking a liter of Coke every day for decades? I mean, so the dangers of industrial food are different. They generally are safe in the instance that you eat it, but the problems that they cause have to do with long-term exposure to whether it's just intense amounts of sugar or whether it's different chemicals that are added to it. But yes, I mean, I think that in general around the world, food food regulations are sort of, written with the idea of the industrial food systems in mind. And I think that, for fermentation and then more broadly for decentralizing the food system and having sort of smaller food enterprises, we just have to recognize that, the standards that might be appropriate for mass production are prohibitive and really not necessary when you're talking about more modest scale production. So if you have a small enterprise with 4 employees that is not producing massive amounts of food, that there's just no reason to hold them to the same standards that you would hold a factory that's producing, millions and millions of units. But I think this is a big issue, and the place where I see it really the most is in restaurants. In the US and in the European Union, there's this idea that in a restaurant, it's dangerous to serve food to people that has sat for more than 4 hours, between refrigeration temperatures and about 60 degrees Celsius, which describes almost every fermented food. So I have visited, some of the most renowned restaurants in the world, and they're all hiding things from their inspectors. Rather than confronting the authorities and saying, these are, unreasonable standards. They don't allow us to make the most flavorful things in the world. Which we want to make, in-house, they're just hiding it from their inspectors. So, I just think we need to, do more, changing the regulations, making exceptions in the regulations for smaller scale enterprises, making exceptions for people in restaurants who are, fermenting things that are generally regarded as safe. So sauerkraut, there's no case history of illness from sauerkraut. And yet, according to this idea of no more than 4 hours between refrigeration temperatures and 60 degrees Celsius, nobody could ever make sauerkraut, and there's no rational basis for not allowing it, just because it never makes anybody sick. So yes, I think that regulations need to change, recognizing the sort of shifting, desires of the population.
Ime, ¿tenés alguna otra?
Okay. Yo comprendo un poquito.
The first one is, what do you think that can bring us back from our ideas of nature and biodiversity in fermenting our food? What can we recover from those concepts that are almost disappeared in this food system, industrial food system?
Well, okay. So one thing that I would say is that before the industrial food system, and if you look around it, every other creature on the earth, what living things generally spend most of their time doing is procuring food, and that connects them to their environment and all of the other forms of life around them, some of which are their food. But because we have sort of dissociated ourselves for the most part from food production, and part of our sort of advanced evolution is that we don't have to concern ourselves with those things. Food has become, rather than a biological connection, it's become this sort of economic connection. As long as you have enough money in your pocket, you go to the store, and whatever you find in the store you buy, and it's just it's a transaction. And so I think that we've really, it's a major way that we've removed ourselves from the natural world. So I think, the more we can get people becoming more connected to their food, whether that's, having a little garden, learning how to make sauerkraut, supporting a farm that they visit sometimes, like any of these things, like get people closer to the natural world. And I think that, that's a necessity. Like if we're going to sort of like, turn back from the sort of, brink of destruction where we are now, like, part of that process has to be becoming more connected to the natural world around us. And I don't think food is the only way to do that. I don't even think food is the primary way to do that, but food is a very powerful way to do that. So I think, when you start thinking about the bacteria in your food, you're thinking about biodiversity. You're thinking about the relationship between different kinds of organisms. And, the more you make sauerkraut or the more you make yogurt, the more relationship you're developing with, different kinds of forms of life. And that makes you start noticing even other forms of life. So, I don't think it's like a singular solution, but I think that it's a necessary part of the solution of getting people more connected to the natural world around them, and thinking about important concepts like biodiversity. And generally people think about biodiversity as something that's like out there. It's like the rainforest, it's the fish in the ocean, and it is those things, but it's also within us, and we are all microcosms. Yes. And the same kind of diminishing biodiversity that we're seeing in the world around us, we're experiencing, at least those of us living in the industrial world eating processed food, we're experiencing it within us as well.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, well,
Me gustaría hacer esta última reflexión respecto de que en Argentina y en varios países todavía está como la fermentación como visto desde un punto de vista un poco negativo, y yo lo he escuchado hablar de una manera bastante poética al respecto, y a veces ese cambio de punto de vista, ese enfoque, da ideas nuevas a la gente que lo puedan absorber. ¿Me ayudan?
We would like you to end all this interview with your reflection about what fermentation in a positive way, in a poetic way, the way that you speak, you're always speaking in a very poetical way about fermentation, and we would like to have some words from you for the last.
We think the way you express yourself has really changed Argentinians' people's minds about fermentation. That people see something as rotten.
Right. Sure. Well, the main way, like if someone tells me like, oh, I don't like fermented foods, or I hate the idea of fermented foods, the first thing I try to do is demonstrate to them how differently they would eat if they didn't have fermented foods, and that that bread is fermented, and vinegar is fermented, and wine is fermented, and the mustard needs fermentation, and the ketchup needs fermentation for the vinegar, and all of these like everyday foods that they eat are fermented. And so they are all, everybody is eating food that has been partially broken down by bacteria and or fungi before they eat it. So that's simply a fact. Like everybody eats and drinks products of fermentation. And then sure, not everybody is going to like every flavor of fermentation. For some people it might just be the idea of it that they don't like. What I've noticed with, let's say, a food like sauerkraut is maybe people have only tried a very strong sauerkraut that's fermented for months and has a very, strong acidic flavor. And for many people who aren't familiar with this food, that's just too strong of a flavor. So what I often do is ferment it for a very short time, 3 or 4 days. So it's only mildly acidic, it's full of bacteria. I mean, you still get a lot of probiotic benefit. I mean, the community is not fully developed, but if the flavor of a more lightly fermented food is more acceptable to people, you have to work with people, where they are. So that's it. I mean, for me, like, one side of it is just helping people recognize that fermentation is already a part of their life, and it's not sort of some alien, sort of process that's about rotten food. And then the second part is, recognizing that it's all ferments are along a spectrum. So kombucha, like, I don't know if you're not, that's yerba mate that you're drinking, but let's say you were drinking kombucha, you could make a kombucha that's very, very sour and almost like vinegar, and you can make a kombucha that is only minimally sour. And still very sweet. So they all exist along a spectrum. Cheeses, like, I love stinky, overripe cheeses. I have certainly learned that not everybody shares my passion for these strong flavors. And so, many people who would say, like, yes, I love cheese, it turns out they only like milder cheeses and they don't like stronger flavors. So I think it's just important for people to understand that all of these ferments, whether it's, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, cheese, they all exist along a spectrum. And the flavors can be made either stronger or milder. And that's part of what's exciting about making it yourself, is you can tailor it to your own flavor. But in terms of people who just have the idea that they don't like it, I think it's important to communicate that to them, and also maybe give them an opportunity to taste something that's more mildly fermented, to let them say, oh, actually, that's pretty good. I don't know what I was so afraid of.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Okay.
man. I love you, man.
Okay, it's my pleasure to speak with you. I hope to meet you all in 6 months' time.
The revolution,
7 months.
The revolution is fermentation.
You
Yes.
are to die for, and all countries. He makes it general, so we make you really happy. We're expecting you. We'll talk to you.
Nice.
Gracias por
Okay,
venir,
great.
Crudo.
Bye bye. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you.
Also to you.